when you're around a horse, you need to be aware of what his ears are doing, what his eyes are doing, what his nostrils doing, what his muzzle's doing, what his breathing's doing, what his back's doing, what his tail's doing. Is it up? Is it clamped? Is it loose? What his feet are doing? Is he standing square? Is he standing crooked? And you need to know all that stuff because they know when you know and they know when you don't. So basically, they know when you are present. Equine-assisted therapy and healing, that's it right there. You've got to be present when you're around them. For it to work well, you've got to be present. Lao Tzu said in 800 BC, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you are peaceful, you are in the present. And that's one of the prerequisites of getting along well with horses. I know there's lots of equine-assisted therapy, and I think it's great, but I have actually found that there's a lot of therapy in just working with horses the right way.
Welcome to the Herd is Calling podcast. This is where we break free from conventional norms to explore the art, science, and wonder of the horse-human connection. I'm Josh Williams, and together with my wife Victoria, we're your hosts. Our mission is to inspire and empower you to improve the lives of horses. Subscribe to the Herd is Calling on Substack for behind-the-scenes stories and unique content. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome to the Herd is Calling podcast. We're thrilled to have Warwick Schiller joining us today. This is a great opportunity to turn the mics the other way around and let Warwick share all about his story today. I know a lot of people listening are familiar with his podcast, The Journey On podcast. We're just excited to have Warwick with us and get to dig a little deeper into your story and your journey today. Thank you for joining us, Warwick.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. This is going to be fun.
So Warwick, tell us about your horse life these days and maybe a snapshot of a typical day for you with or without the horses.
We bought a new ranch earlier this year, and I used to travel. We used to have 6 acres. Now we've got 42 acres. And when we bought this place, my wife said, if we buy this place, you can't be gone as much as you have been. So, in the past and probably pre-COVID, I traveled a lot. I'd be gone for 2 weeks or so, home for a week, gone again, back. This year, I've been home probably a little bit more, but I still don't have a typical day. I probably spend more time in front of this computer here than out messing with the horses. And, that's because the business is this bit. The horses is what I love to do, but the business is this bit. And I'd actually like to be able to spend more time with the horses.
Yeah, I can relate. We're a little bit new to the computer side of things, and I've been feeling that. And I'm just like, I got to get outside and move around a little bit. We'll dig a little deeper into this, but just out the gate, what is it do you think makes people great with horses?
No ego, being able to be present, being able to be in their own bodies, know what their own body's doing. Like Ben Atkinson does this amazing liberty stuff. I don't know if you've ever seen the Ben stuff, but he'll be liberty Roman riding 2 horses. He'll have 4 on either side of him, and they will go over a jump together, things like that. Or he'll drive. He does a lot of driving stuff. He'll have a pair of horses side by side, another pair behind that, so 2 lines of 3, and he's Roman riding the back pair and driving the other 4, and they'll go over jumps and things like that. And just listen to Ben the other day, just talking about the tiniest little details, like being aware of your breathing and aware of your body and aware of any tension you might hold in your body. He was talking about dropping whips. He says, I love it when I drop the whips because it tells me that I'm not holding on to the whip tightly. Like just what your fingers are doing, the tension in your fingers and stuff. And it's just about being really real. I think it's the same as being world-class at anything. It's about being present, being in your body. It's about the stories you tell yourself about yourself.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's not about horses, really. Horses just provide some really good feedback about where you're at, sort of thing, real-time feedback. And I know we're probably going to get into my thoughts on equine-assisted therapy and stuff like that, but that's why it works.
We've been on a journey ourselves the last few years, but something that I've been doing with my horses, just framing the way I work with them as my active meditation. I've tried for years to implement a meditation practice that like works and that I can be consistent with and try to be disciplined. And it's kind of come and went, and it's been hard, and I haven't really found something that works except for going out at sunrise and just playing with the horses in a discipline, but also just seeing what comes up within that loose framework. And lately, especially as I've been going out to the pen and bringing them in and doing that, I notice things like I notice what the rope feels like in my fingertips. I notice what my clothes feel on my skin. All of a sudden, we'll notice an expression in the horse's face that I never have ever knew was there before. And I've been around horses my whole life. So there's something inherently meditative about anything that you focus on and really put your attention on, but something about being outside, something about being in silence, something about being absolutely fully present. It's amazing. And it's like, ooh, I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to get, like, after years and years of meditating, I'm starting to get what this meditating thing is all about, you know?
Right. And the thing about that, I think I want to share with you guys and with people, I mean, you'd know this, but when you said, oh, why wasn't I thinking of this before? You've got to go gentle with yourself about, like, when you start to see things differently, all sorts of possibilities open up if you look forward, but all sorts of negative self-talk can open up if you look backwards and go, oh, I should have known that then. Like, you didn't know it then. You know what I mean? And you weren't ready to know it then. You know, I did a clinic in Scotland years ago, and the guy that organized the clinic was telling me that he was a black belt in karate when he was relatively young, and when he got to be a black belt, then he wanted to be a second dan black belt, and he wanted to learn all this cool stuff. And what he found out was that when you get to be a black belt, when you want to be a second dan black belt, you don't learn anything new. You go back to the beginning and you relearn everything you've ever learned, but now you have a black belt's eyes, a black belt's discipline, and a black belt's mindset, and then you can learn it on a deeper level. But you cannot learn to do it at a second dan black belt level the first time around. You have to learn it on the level you can learn it on, and then you go back. And it's the same thing with, you know, the guy where you guys are on your journey right now, and people listening, you know, it's great when you have those those moments where you can't unsee what you've now seen, but it also, there's the temptation with some of us to start beating ourselves up because we didn't see it before, and you have to understand that you couldn't see it before.
I'm so glad you said that. That really is such a big thing, that I guess the concept of self-compassion, you know, and maybe especially with horses, because you feel like maybe you weren't doing things right by the horse at some point. But, you know, it just goes back to what you said originally, that presence, you know, it's like you're looking back, you're looking forward, where can we just find the moment? And I'm just really glad you said that, because I know the beating ourselves up part, it's certainly something I do a lot of, and a lot of people we work with struggle with that too.
Yeah, you know, I was watching American Idol a few years ago, and they had like the top 10. They go to Hawaii, they do a concert in front of a group of people, and then the next day they go in front of the judges, and the judges pick the top 5. And this one kid was like phenomenally talented, but didn't have a lot of self-confidence, you know. And he goes up in front of the judges, and Lionel Richie said to him, he said, being a star is having equal amounts of grandiosity and self-doubt and keeping it somewhere in the middle. But you've got to have both ends. If you don't have both ends, if you have just the grandiosity, you got your head up your ass sort of thing. But if you have the just crippling self-doubt, you'll never get anywhere. And so you've got to have that pull from both ends. And you've got to be aware of when you get pulled a bit too far one way or a bit too far the other way. And yeah, I love that. You just got to keep it somewhere in the middle.
I wonder, as we watch you teach, as I see you do clinics, as I hear you talking on podcasts, I think, Warwick seems like a very confident guy. Like he just seems very assured of himself. I love your storytelling.
Yeah.
Like your storytelling is legendary. I'm just curious how that's manifested through your life. Like, do you identify as a confident person? What has your journey been like?
Hell no, I'm definitely not a confident person. Never really had much confidence at all. And how I ended up doing what I'm doing is, I came to America in 1990. I wanted to work for a reining trainer for a year just to learn a bit about it so I could go home to Australia and play with my own horses. And I worked for this guy for a year, and the day I was leaving, we shook hands on his porch, and he said, "Hey, if you want to come back, I'll give you a job because you could do this for a living if you wanted to." And I'd never, ever considered that at all. I'd never thought that, hey, yes, I'm good enough. I could do this for a living. There was me, and then there was those guys out there. And so, I've never had a lot of self-confidence. And I think when you go through life not having a lot of self-confidence, and then you start to, achieve some things, at least for me, then it rapidly goes to the other end, and you have that grandiosity thing going on. And then your wife gives you an ass chewing, and now you're back in your hole again. You know what I mean? But it's a bit of a journey going from someone who, probably didn't think a whole lot of themselves, and I don't think it was like, really negative self-talk. It just wasn't a whole lot of confidence, and then I think you get that false confidence. And I went to a thing a few years ago. It was a men's emotional resilience retreat, and the book that was like the outline of the weekend was a book called King, Warrior, Lover, Magician, and these 4 archetypes. And each one of those has a job. The king does things for the good of all the people. The warrior is the brave one. The lover is the empathetic one. And the magician is he's the quantifying things, But the king supposed to, and all of them have a shadow side. And the king does things for the good of everyone. But the shadow side of that is the prince. And prince energy is doing things for external validation. And at the time, that was only maybe 4 years ago now, maybe. But, at the time, my YouTube channel had, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 million views or something like that, And I'm putting all this content out there, and I think I'm doing good work. And then they said, the king does things for the good of people, and the prince does things for external validation. And all of a sudden, I had this existential crisis. Like, am I doing it for the external validation, or am I doing it because I'm trying to help people? And I really had to think about that. And I do think about it often, actually. That's my benchmark. If I'm like, yes, I want to put this particular thing out, I've got to stop and think, why am I putting that out there? Am I trying to help people? Am I trying to put it out there because people will think, oh, that's brilliant, and that's cool? Not that's cool. If I put it out there and I'm thinking, well, people will think that's cool, that's king energy. But if I put it out there and I have people, and I'm thinking I'm doing it because people will think I'm cool, that's prince energy.
Just taking a look at that, though, I mean, that's a practice in of itself, right? It's a tricky road in terms of social media. I mean, it's such a paradoxical format too, to be out there, putting yourself out there to help people. But then you also are like in this social media world, there's like an element of like, well, you've got to like get people to notice if you're going to be able to help them. So it's just like finding that middle ground is tricky, right?
Yeah, at our recent podcast summit in Australia, a good friend of ours, Jane Pike, was presenting one day, and she said, there is no balance. There is only balancing.
Ooh,
oh, I love that.
That's good.
I only wrote, on stage, I only pulled my phone out and wrote several things down in my notes, and that was one of them. Some other stuff I thought, I'll remember it for later, but that was like, I don't want to forget that. So on stage, I pulled the phone out like, let me write that down for a sec.
Yeah, I just wrote it down.
Well, that goes back to practice too, right? We have a friend, his name's Jacob Holmer. He has been a working student and working at Barbier Farms down in California with the Maestri, Dominique Barbier. And he came out here and helped us with an embodiment workshop. His definition of embodiment is practice. And that's kind of what I hear in Jane Pike's quote too, is balancing. It's a practice. It's an active, going back to sort of an active meditation or self-awareness. You do the work, you know?
Another thing I love about that quote is it really helps you not have the negative self-judgment. Like when you get too far one way, you understand that's normal. It's not like I'm supposed to be in the middle, and if I leave the middle, I'm going to give myself a good talking to, because what are you thinking? There is no balance. There is only balancing. And so it goes back and forth. And I think if you think about it that way, you can be a lot more gentle with yourself, because when you get on the grandiose end or the depression sort of end, you go, yeah, this is normal. I just got to steer the ship back over here. I've been talking in clinics and stuff this year about sailing. My son sails, and if you want to go in the direction where the wind is, you can't sail directly into the wind. You've got to go off one way and then off the other way. And that you do a lot of course corrections, and eventually you get there. And I talk about course corrections. This would be the balancing part. Like, hey, it's just a course correction. It's not right or wrong. It's part of the process. That course correction. You're never going in the right direction. You just keep going in the wrong direction different ways.
Yeah,
that's a great analogy. I wonder, Warwick, could we hit the rewind button a little bit? I haven't heard a lot about your early life, like in Australia before you came to America. What were some of your early experiences? Perhaps what drew you to even want to come and study the art of reining in the first place?
Well, I think it all comes back down to the lack of self-confidence thing. I was a pretty unremarkable sort of a child. You know what I mean? Didn't have any amazing talents or skills. I suppose I told stories a lot, so I guess that one's carried on. I talked a lot. I didn't talk till I was 2, so they were worried about me, like, he's not talking. And then I started talking, and I never shut up. But like, say, I wasn't terribly athletic or whatever. So say, at school, and you're doing sports, and they elect 2 captains, and one picks one side and one picks the other side. I was always picked last. You know what I mean? And I think that becomes a bit of who you are and what you think of yourself. But we always rode horses, and did stuff with horses, and I don't know, it seemed to come quite easy to me. I wouldn't say I wasn't a standout there. My older brother was a standout. He won everything everywhere we went, sort of thing. I was Steve Schiller's younger brother. But the thing about the horses was, it was a place where I was at least one of the cool kids. I wasn't the coolest kid, but I wasn't an outcast, sort of thing. And so I think that's what kept me with the horses. I think it was more about getting external validation than anything. It's not like I didn't like the horses, but I think that was a big draw, and what led me to the reining. So we grew up showing in quarter horse shows. So at the time you'd do every event on one horse, and the reining was really crude back then. But then as we started seeing videos, like in the mid to late 80s from America, I'm like, holy cow! It was like, oh, that's cool. That's really cool. So what drew me to the reining? That's really cool, and I really think what drew me to the reining was, it's really cool, and if I could do that, people would think I was cool. If I'm going to be honest about the whole thing. And then as I got into it, it's, you get fascinated by the process of going from, unridden to that high level stuff as your goal. And and you really get into understanding, little step by step, like it's a 2-year process from starting to ride them to the show ring, and you've got 2 years. It's not like you got 6 months. And the faster you try to get to the end, the more you got to go back to the start and do your 2nd degree black belt thing.
For sure. On your podcast, you share a lot about your self-discovery journey. So what was that moment? How did things shift in terms of your intentional, or like the direction that you wanted to take what you're doing with your work?
Well, that wasn't my decision. And actually, nothing I'm doing was my decision. I had said that I didn't have a lot of self-confidence, and I listened to a Tony Robbins podcast one time, and he was talking about, he must have had a previous podcast where he talked about the first 5 things to being sort of like a complete human being or whatever. And he said, today I'm going to talk about the next 2. There's 7 things you got to have, and the 6th one, this one's really hard. This one is giving with no thought of receiving anything back for it. There is a magic in that. It seems if you can do that with absolute clear purpose of, I'm not doing it and pretending I'm doing it because I'm not getting anything back. I have no expectation in any part of my being that something's going to come back from this. That's when you get given the magic stuff. And so we'd moved back to Australia for 4 years, 2006 to 2010. So my wife and son and a 40-foot container, 2 horses and 2 dogs moved to Australia. And I was on the board of the Reining Association in Australia, not because I wanted to implement policy. I just wanted to help them get better, make better decisions and stuff. And there's a big horse expo in Australia called Equitana. And at one of the board meetings, they said, hey, Equitana wants someone to do a reining demonstration. And out of everybody on the board, I lived closest to the place. I was only 8 hours away. Some of them would be like 24, 30 hours drive away. And I said, yeah, I can go down and do that. And so once Equitana heard I was coming down, they contacted me, and they have a road to the horse colt starting thing. They call it Way of the Horse. And they said, would you like to be the in-arena commentator? Like not the introduction guy, but the guy who commentates on what's going on. I said, yeah, I can do that. No worries. So it's over 3 days, and there's about 3,000 or 4,000 people pack in that thing to watch that. And so I got to stand in front of 3,000 or 4,000 people for 3 days and explain stuff. And if I have a talent, it's being able to explain stuff in a way people understand without having to sit down and write it down and memorize. It just comes out of me. And I was doing that to help out. That was all I was doing was, yeah, I'll give you a hand. And then the week after that, my phone started ringing with people saying, hey, we saw you at Equitana. We love the way you explain stuff. Would you like to come and do a clinic? And I'd never thought I'm the guy who can do clinics because I've never had a lot of self-confidence. And so I started doing clinics there. And while I was doing a lot of those clinics in Australia, I noticed that a lot of people struggle with things with their horses just because they probably have a certain perspective that kind of gets in their way. And so when we finally moved back to America, in the end of 2010, I had to start all over again, had to build a clientele again. So I had plenty of time because I only had a couple of horses in training initially. I started making videos of some of the things I was doing with horses and putting them on Facebook and YouTube to help people with that perspective. Like, this stuff's not that hard if you can look at it this way. And all that was doing was, hey, I've noticed from the clinics that people struggle with stuff. I want to share this stuff. And then people wanted longer videos. And at the time, I don't know if the rules have changed, but at the time on YouTube, you could not put longer than 10 minutes of video on YouTube unless you had a certain number of views, I think, or subscribers. Maybe it was views. And so I had to look around for a place. People wanted longer videos. I had to look around for a place to host that. And I found this video hosting site, but the video hosting site wanted to charge me money to put the videos on there. So I'm like, oh, now I got to charge people money to watch the videos. And then I had 1 subscriber, and then I had 2, and then it started to grow, and it grew a bit more, and then it grew a bit more, and it grew to the point in about 2015 where I'm like, so at this time I'm kind of the YouTube videos and the Facebook stuff has made me, a bit more visible in the public eye. So instead of just doing clinics close to home or whatever, I'm going to Europe doing clinics. I'm going to England doing clinics. I'm doing clinics around America. I'm doing them in New Zealand and Australia. By all intents and purposes, from the outside world looking in, I have achieved a level of success that people tend to look up to and think, oh, you must be able to do, hard things, whatever. I've got here by always taking the easy way out. I basically all my life, oh yes, I follow opportunities that arise. It's not like I don't knock the doors down. It's just when a door opens, I go through it. And I do think that there is a level of character building that is involved in doing the hard things. And obviously, I think I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing in life because I've got here without doing any hard things. So obviously, that's what, that's kind of what the universe wants me to do. But I have come to realize that, yeah, I've missed out on some character development from not doing hard things. which is why I was in your neck of the woods recently doing that Gaucho Derby boot camp, because I'm going to go to Argentina next year and do something really hard.
This is a little off the stream that we were heading on, but are you scared about that? Are you like, do you have fear going into that?
Well, when I first signed up for it, I didn't, because it's 500 kilometers on a horse. Well, I'd ridden 300 kilometers across the Gobi Desert on a camel, so I can ride 500 kilometers on a horse. Then I started to realize the complexity and the challenges of this race. And for quite a while, it kind of, I was scared, but I've been up to Bend, Oregon, near you guys, to do 2 Gaucho Derby boot camps. I went to Argentina last year and did what's called the Gaucho Derby Academy, where you learn all about it. And after this last boot camp a week or two ago in Bend, I was like, yeah, I'm ready now. And I know, no, I wouldn't say I'm scared of it, but I do know that I was talking to someone on the weekend in Kentucky, and they said, this is going to be a spiritual experience, don't you? And I'm like, oh yeah, I know it's going to break me down. Mm-hmm. It's going to, at some point in time, I'm like, I just can't do this. I can't do this. But see, I'm not terribly disciplined. I'm not terribly organized. I just kind of follow my wandering mind sort of thing. And my life works that way. My wife is very organized and very disciplined. So, I'm like the creator and she's like the doer of the deeds sort of thing. But when you're out in the middle of Patagonia on a horse, being disorganized and undisciplined isn't going to work. There's going to be some serious repercussions for that. So it's kind of like unknowingly put myself in a situation that's going to provide some life experiences that I need. And I'm kind of looking forward to that.
We call that the answering the calling of like the hero's quest, Joseph Campbell level.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, it's going to, and as they say, as those adventurous type people say, I'm going to learn to embrace the suck.
That's interesting. You framed your journey as taking easy roads. I'm sure you're simplifying a lot there, because just in my experience and observing others, a lot of times when you take that introspective path, there's usually something that sort of pushes you there, whether it's something really horrible or just some sort of awakening where you like see things and then you can't unsee them anymore. There must have been, you mentioned the clinics and just seeing, I assume what you meant, you just started seeing these principles and you started seeing it all, because at that point you must have had tens of thousands of hours of experience working with horses. Was there a moment or a collection of moments that sticks with you that you see as a fork in the road?
Yeah. So was there one moment? I'd say that, well, the first one was about 7 years ago. I mentioned I've been traveling around the world doing clinics, but at this point in time, I don't know how many views I got on my YouTube channel, but it's working. People bring me a horse at a clinic and it always leaves better, and I know what I'm doing. And it wasn't like I was, it wasn't this egotistical, I know what I'm doing. I was kind of confident in what I was doing. And I'd always been kind of an outside the box guy, like looking at stuff. When I was doing the reining, I was always looking at stuff outside the box from the reining. But everything I'd been looking outside the box was still under the umbrella of training horses. And then my wife bought a horse, and he's an exceptional reining horse, but he had a few funny things about him. And I thought, I can fix that. That's easy. And when we bought him and I started working with him, like, I couldn't make it better by training. And it kind of made me think, well, and I kind of stepped back from trying to, like, I just accepted, okay, that's how he is, and that bit's going to be there. It still works. He could be 10 times better if it wasn't there, but it still works. Like, he was a superstar, and my wife's just showing him the non-pro, so he doesn't need to be a big-time superstar. But this horse was big-time superstar, talented, could do all the hard stuff. There was just some tension in him that caused, some things to happen. Anyway, I stopped trying to change anything about him, but it kind of made me think, what else is there? How else could I look at him? And I started looking at stuff, reading articles online, things like that, by horse people who were not in the sphere I'd always been looking in. And I don't mean a certain discipline. I mean the horse training community. It really got me, things started happening. So I was at a this story here is probably the catalyst of the rest of my life. I was at a clinic in Texas, and this lady had this Mustang. It was a 3-day clinic. Lady had this Mustang that she came to the clinic with, and he is 9 years old, been out of the wild for 6 years. She's had him since he was 3. Does all the groundwork good, rides good, but he has this random bolting issue. Like out of the blue, he'll bolt, and whatever causes him to bolt, the day before didn't bother him. And the trainer was there too, and she's pretty handy. And I asked, so what's the common denominator? And she goes, I can't figure it out. I said, well, I can't help the problem, because the bolting's not the problem. It's figuring out what the cause of it is the problem. But you don't fix the bolting, you fix the cause. And she said, I don't know. So I don't remember this horse the first day in the clinic. So at the time I was having a morning group and an afternoon group, and she was in the morning group. The second day of the clinic, the lady's name's Hannah and the horse's name's Cody. And she brings Cody in, and actually his name, let's call him Dakota. He got called Cody because it was a shortened of Dakota, and we've since learned crazy story through an animal communicator that he likes to be called Dakota. So let's call him Dakota. She comes in and she's doing some groundwork with him, and she says, hey, I got a question. And I said, what's up? And she said, I'm trying to just disengage him, just have him step over behind. But every time I go to walk down the side of him from the front, he turns his head and blocks me out. And I said, okay, let me try. And I went to do it, and he did block me out. And in the past, I would have just reached under his jaw with my hand, moved his head over. So now this would be his left eye, because it's his near side. And then I just would have walked down the side and disengaged him. And there's a mindset involved in that. So you're not punishing the horse or anything, but you are. Why do you do that? Because you go, I'm not going to move my feet. You're going to move your head and allow me on this side. Like there's a winner and a loser. Like if I walk around your head, you made me move my feet and I lose. And you win. But I didn't do that. I went to walk down the side of him. He turned his head to block me. And instead of doing something about it, I recognized it as, oh, that's some concern. So I stepped back in front of him and just waited for him to, I don't know if he blinked, sighed, his ears changed, but I was just looking for the little things to tell me that bit of concern that he just had has gone away. And at this point in time, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just like, this is what I intuitively feel like I should do right now. And I tried it again, and he blocked me out, and I stepped back. And this went on for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. I got no idea what I'm doing. And then at one point in time, I go to walk down there, and now he doesn't block me. He lets me walk down the side of him. So he's been ridden for 6 years, so obviously you can touch him, can't you? And so I reached out to put my hand on his wither, but I was really intently watching his head and his facial expression. And as my hand approached his wither, his head raised just half an inch. And so I pulled my hand back like, oh, does that bother you? Waited for him to look more relaxed again. And I did like that for 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. And after 5 or 10 minutes, I can now reach out, put my hand on him, and his expression doesn't change. But I've got to make sure his expression is not in like of an internal state. Anyway, it's not a shutdown. I wait till he's like he's bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, then I reach out and touch him, and he stays bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm like, okay, that's good. So I walk back to the front. He lets me walk down the side of him. He lets me touch him. Like, okay, so now I'm going to disengage him. And she's trained him well. And as soon as I ask him to disengage, he just steps over behind, And I said, I think you've probably done that so much, he's sick of you disengaging. So I'm going to show you that I'm going to step back to the front, see what he does. I go back to the front. I walk down beside him. I disengage him. I said, okay. I think it's because you've done it too much. So what I'm going to do is show you that. So I'm going to go to the front, walk down the side, disengaging. I'm just going to keep doing it until he quits. He's going to start blocking me out again. I just want to show you, I think that's why he was blocking you out. So I go back to the front, walk down the side, disengage, front, and like he keeps letting me down there. And I'm like, well, I don't know what happened, but that's not what I thought was going on. But anyway, it's fixed. Here you go. Hang on to him. And she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, oh, just hang with him. I'll go help someone else. Don't ask anything. I'm just hang with him. So I'm helping somebody else. 10 minutes later, there's this collective from the crowd. And I turn and look, and this horse is buckled at the knees, dropped to his belly. and his head's like, his nose is straight up and down on the ground, and he's snoring little dust clouds. And then he has a roll, jumps up, shakes, and then boom, just drops like a shot dog sort of thing. And I said to Hannah, is that normal? And she said, I've had him for 6 years and I've seen him lay down up on the horizon. He jumped up. And I'm like, well, in that case, leave him there. This horse, and this was probably 10 o'clock in the morning by now, he lays out flat and sleeps for 2 hours. Horses are riding around him, the loudspeaker's going. And we actually have to wake him up to get him out of the arena to bring the afternoon group in. So off she leaves. And anyway, the next morning she comes back in and says, what do you want me to do? And I said, I would just hang on with him, just stand there with him for a bit, see what he does. And I help somebody else. 20 minutes later, boom, down he goes, unconscious, sleeps for 4 hours. Doesn't move, like he's out. And so I knew, because this horse hasn't laid down, she hasn't seen him lay down 6 years, this is a different behavior, a totally different behavior. And it's on the scale, on the balancing scale, it's a good behavior. It's not like he's changed, but he's worse. He's changed, but he's different and better. And so I came home from there. And so we all know horses can sleep standing up or laying down. And I just started researching online about horse sleeping. And what I didn't realize is that in order to get REM sleep, horses have to lay down flat. They can't get REM sleep standing up. It's a light sleep. It's not a deep sleep. And we know from humans, if we don't get enough deep sleep, we don't get enough REM sleep, you're either irritable or anxious. Okay. And anxiety might be the cause of a lot of problems, including maybe bolting. Anyway, that was 5 years ago. That horse has not bolted once since.
Oh, wow.
And I realized, so what did I do? What did I do that caused that? I didn't teach him to do anything. I listened to him. But how does listening help? And then I realized the listening told him how aware I was of those little signals. When he said, hey, that bothers me a little bit, he turned his head and said, hey, that bothers me if you go to do that. I stepped back and not only said I'm listening, but I'm saying I saw that. And what I've realized now is that stepping back right there, I said, I see that. I'm aware of that. And he's kind of like, well, if you're aware of that, you're probably aware enough to keep an eye out for predators while I'll have a sleep. It's that sense of safety, that it's what's now I've become known as attunement, which is that sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, getting gotten. And so then, like, now I'm down a rabbit hole, and I was doing lots of clinics then. So like every weekend or two, I get to work with 12 new horses. And I would show up to a clinic and people are like, okay, what are we going to do? I'm like, I have no idea. Actually, and just not long after, I think that triggered something else. I was in Wisconsin. I was doing a clinic in Wisconsin and did a clinic one day. And then that night we went out to dinner, and then I was at this guy's house with a few people having a few drinks, and we're sitting around talking. And I was talking with these 2 girls from England, plus the guy who owned the house. And the conversation was going around, and something happened to where one of them said something that made me realize, look at the world differently. And then the next one said something, and then he said something, and it went around about twice. And all of a sudden I lost it. I just broke down and started screaming. I'm like, who are you people? And what planet are you from? Like, I was just like, I don't know what it was weird. And the whole room shifted. Like, it felt like I got dizzy. Like the floor just tilted one way, and like all the furniture could have slid over to one corner. It didn't, but that's what it kind of felt like. And yeah, I didn't know what the hell was going on, but my world changed right then. I woke up the next morning and I've got a clinic to do. And I'm like, I don't know if I can go out there because I'm not the same human being that was out there before. Actually, I don't know which human being I am. I don't know who I am. Because I had a shift in perspective that night. That was one of those things, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the perspective was more what I thought I knew or the view I had of the world was totally incorrect. My truths had changed. I'd had a truth, and it wasn't the truth anymore. And all of a sudden, I was kind of lost. I didn't know who I was, and I didn't know how I was going to go do that clinic. But all the clinics after that, like I'd show up and I'd go, a lot of you are here probably because you've seen that guy on YouTube. I'm not that guy. I actually don't know which guy I am, but I'm not that guy. And I no longer can do what I've been doing because I know there's something different we can do. And so I got to experiment with horses every weekend, and 12 different personalities of horses every weekend. And that really, then I was just experimenting on what can I get done by communicating my awareness, and then found a lot of problems went away with the horses. So that was, the horse my wife bought was like step one. That was like, okay, I don't know how to solve that problem. So maybe it's out there in a different way. Step two was from the investigations I had. I tried it with that Mustang, and that blew my mind. And then step three, probably, I don't know, maybe a month or two after the Mustang, that other big shift happened. And that was the first of a number of those shifts. Is what I started listening to Brene Brown after that. And she said she was talking to her therapist, and she was talking about her she said, yeah, I was talking to my therapist about my first mental breakdown. My therapist calls it a spiritual awakening, but I was calling it a mental breakdown. But I had one of those things. So that's really what started the whole new journey. Part two of my journey.
Oh, that's fascinating. There's so much to dig into there. I wonder, early on, let's go back to step one, when you first started looking up some different ways of looking at things, was there anything that really stuck with you that you can remember now looking back, whether it was a person or a method or a technique? Was there anything that you were able to apply at your home there that was different than what you were doing before?
It was more about listening, like not doing, but being around him, and noticing the tiniest little things, I remember the horse that my wife had bought. I remember just going out and like standing in the pasture with him, and he was quite shut down. But what I'd noticed, if you approached him, his eyes would turn away from you. He wouldn't turn his head, but he'd just kind of turn his eyes like, oh God, what's this guy want? I wasn't looking for that before, because I'm walking up to him because I'm going to catch him and go saddle him. I'm going to ride him. I'm going to work on the sliding style, whatever, I wasn't right in the moment. I had all this stuff I was going to do with him. And I started just being aware of that. And I noticed when his eyes would slightly turn, I'd just stop, kind of step back. So this is probably where the Mustang thing came from. But then when I stood there, he would have all these strange contractions in the side of his face. There'd be twitching and muscles jumping. And I remember I did it one day, and I was out there doing that. And then I was like, what the hell's going on here? And I'd read, so a book that really kind of was one of the things that influenced me was Martin Black and Stephen Peters' book, Evidence-Based Horsemanship. And Maddie Butcher helped kind of write that book. And so anyway, this day, after doing that with Sherlock, horses named Sherlock, I ran inside and I called Maddie. I'm like, Maddie, I was just watching all this stuff, and but it's really about listening instead of telling, sort of thing. And that was probably the big thing. But that all coincided with all the stuff I was reading online was about listening first, just not doing but being. And yeah, that was really kind of the start of it.
I think that's really cool that you're able to see that principle of listening. I just think that's really, really special. We had kind of a funny, I think it's kind of funny because we were, like you, had been involved in more performance oriented traditions, and we went to work with kids then because that felt better to work with kids in that beginner's mind. And the kids, they get crazy sometimes around the grooming bays. And Victoria, it was almost like, just to get control of the situation, said, let's be silent and let's move at half speed. And but the magic that ensued from that, now it's one of our most popular exercises, is just to not use any verbal, to be totally silent, and to whatever speed you're moving, try to cut it in half. Just those little things. And I love it because it's so simple on the one hand, but it opens a door to this world that's so rich and so layered. It's just like this other universe. And I feel that when you're talking, just that how you see all the things you didn't see before. And
the kids loved it.
Oh yeah.
The kids thought it was like so funny and so great. And they and the thing with kids is they did it for real. Like they fully invested in that exercise. So that's why also it was like, oh my God, this is like a thing. But
yeah. It was a neat demonstration and like co-regulation. And we had a program that was sort of an alternative to people who had more goal-centric performance riding. We call it holistic horsemanship for kids. So it drew kids that weren't necessarily as motivated to go out and perform. And that helped as well. But some of the parents were like, aren't I paying you to like get them riding? We're just like grooming the whole time.
Sometimes.
But you mentioned that experience at the house when the ground tilted to the side. I was wondering if can we dig into that a little more? Because
it's pretty amazing.
It sounded like, if I heard you correctly, you felt like almost like you were the alien and the world was not what you thought it was at that moment. Was there anything specific?
The conversation was basically the way the conversation kind of went. Every time somebody said something, it was like they all knew it. And I was like, I'm hearing that for the first time, but I should know. It would be like if the conversation was, turning on faucets and stuff, it's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. And everybody's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I mean, it wasn't that. But so someone said something that hit me like, I didn't know that. And this is not stuff I shouldn't know. You know what I mean? One would say something and I think, I didn't know that, but they all seem to think that's just normal. And then the next person said something that I didn't know that the other two thought was perfectly normal. Then the guy, that was the two girls, then the guy said something that hit me like, I didn't know that. And the other two thought it was all normal. And it basically shattered my ego or whatever, but it was just like, it was almost like they'd set me up. Like I asked them the next morning, how long, or maybe I asked them that night, how long you guys been planning that conversation? Because you guys just screwed with my head right then. And they were like, we didn't plan anything. I'm like, no, this is a master plan. Like I felt like they'd been planning this for years to get this very moment where this was going to go down. That's the way I was looking at the time. But it was, mostly I'd say that the things that the basis behind it was they were saying things that all three of them were like, yeah, it's common knowledge. And I had no idea. And it wasn't like, what's the capital of Yugoslavia sort of thing. It was deep wisdom knowledge. And it just, and I've been emotionally shut down all my life. So for me to burst out, bawling my eyes out in front of people was like, that was a bit of an oddity.
Wow, what an experience. Yeah, that's special.
That's vulnerability. And
that funnily enough, I'll tell you where it started. So this was in Wisconsin. This is one weekend. The weekend before, I did a presented at the Midwest Horse Fair in Madison, Wisconsin. Okay. And when you present at those horse expos, most of the time you're working with a horse, but sometimes they will have like a lecture hall where you go and lecture about stuff. And so I did and they always want their titles like 6 months ahead of time. What are you going to talk about? And so I just have this basic title that I throw out to them and I can go wherever I want with it. And it's everything I learned in life I learned from horses. And every time I've done it, it's different. And I've probably been doing that one for maybe 10 years now, I guess. But this one was post Sherlock the year before and post the Mustang probably a month earlier. And so I stood up in front of a room full of probably 200 people and started talking about things. And in that conversation, I probably told these 200 strangers stuff I had never told anybody before. Possibly I said some things I had never told me before. It just kind of came out of me or through me while I was up there. And when I got done there, I walked back to my booth, and 2 booths down from mine was Barbara Schulte. And I'd only met Barbara that morning. I'd known about Barbara for years. Like, she was like a famous person to me. And I go back past the booth, and Barb's lovely. And she said, oh, how was your talk? And I said, oh, Barb, I feel like I've been run over by a train. And she's like, why is that? And I said, I don't know. I feel like I'm exhausted. I just said some stuff in front of a couple of hundred people that I may have never said before out loud, and maybe I've never even said to myself. And she says, oh, well, Brene Brown says vulnerability is the ultimate badassery. And that was the first time I'd heard the name Brene Brown. And then I go back to my booth, and I'm sitting there, and a girl who follows what I do comes up to the booth, follows what I do with the horses at the time, comes up to the booth, and she's talking, and she's a psychiatrist. And she comes up the booth, and she's chatting away. And as a kid, Ray Hunt used to do clinics at her parents' place. So she rode in Ray Hunt clinics a lot as a kid and stuff, but she's a psychiatrist. And the reason she's a psychiatrist is she was training horses and realized, I can't help these horses until I help these people. Like, this is how committed she is. I actually want to train horses, but I need to get inside the people's heads. So then she went off and did a 4-year psychology degree. And now she's a fully qualified psychiatrist. And in the conversation I had with her, she mentioned the words Brene Brown. So, like, the universe gave me 2 Brene Browns in the space of about half an hour. And so I came home from that horse expo and started looked up Brene Brown, got some of her audio books. And I remember I was outside in the tractor driving around one day, moving manure, listening to Brene Brown. And she said, one of the things she said was, you cannot selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower emotions, you automatically suppress the higher ones. And I'm like, yeah, well, I kind of get it, that growing up in quite sensitive in rural Australia, and being a male, you're not supposed to show fear, you're not supposed to cry. And, in my family, you don't show grief. Like, I can remember going to funerals, and mum and dad's like, well, yep, he's dead, whatever, and so I'm like, yeah, well, I know I've got the lower ones as suppressed, but I never thought, could I have more experience of the higher ones? Could I feel more joy or happiness or whatever? So that kind of led me down a rabbit hole there. But that night in Wisconsin was the week after I had stood up in front of, talking about vulnerability, stood up in front of a couple of hundred people and spilled my guts. So I think that put a little crack in the armor, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then this conversation just cracked it wide open, and I had, what would look like a nervous breakdown. And what's funny is the 3 people sitting there were just, while I'm screaming and carrying on, like, who are you people, and what planet are you from? They're kind of sitting there looking at me like, so I think they'd all had that experience at some point in time in their life, much earlier than 50 years old, like mine was. This is my first one of those, and they're kind of sitting there looking at me like, welcome to the club.
Wow.
And then I was all like, so the guy, like, the next day after the clinic, I'm like, so how do I get more of that? He's like, just chill the hell out. It comes when it comes,
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good group of friends you had there. I want to keep those people close.
Right. Among some good folks, that's for sure. And we were just talking this morning, kind of jokingly said all roads lead back to Brene. And we're actually doing a book club with our group of people in our community. We did Daring Greatly, and now we're doing Dare to Lead, and relating it to, how we show up with our horses. And
well, it sounded like you had a vulnerability hangover,
yes.
as she says.
I think so. And I think that's what it was. So it was just, just a series of fortunate events, the Sherlock horse, then the Mustang. And then I happen to be standing in front of a room of 200 people, and I talk about that and that and that. And then the next week I'm in the right room with the right people who ask the right questions. And then, and it went on from there.
Hey friends, Josh here. We've launched a free community for The Herd is Calling. It's on Substack. Subscribe to join thoughtful discussions and access exclusive content. It's as easy to use as social media, but so much better because social media. Am I right? In the words of John Lennon, a dream you dream alone is only a dream, but a dream you dream together is reality. Like the wisdom of the herd, we are stronger together. Click the link nearby to subscribe and get in on the conversation. Now, back to the pod. You mentioned, that being the first time at 50 that you felt that. And, I just want to share that I can relate to that feeling too. Like certain things, I'm kind of like, God dang, I wish I had known that sooner. And I know there's a mountain of things yet to be discovered. And there's sort of almost like this sense of mourning or grief about the time that was lost. But something that helped me with that is just thinking about it like that crack you talked about. It's like that world is timeless. Like there is no time. It's not like our normal three-dimensional world where everything is you're old, you're young, then you're old. There's 24 hours in a day. Like there's something that feels timeless about that. So I feel like you can tap into that at any age and then it's irrelevant how old you are or how old you're not.
Yeah. And, a lot of people have that, I don't want to call them midlife crisis, whatever it is, but a lot of people have that in their, in their early 30s. And I just took a long time to get my first black belt.
Well, now forwarding to the pandemic and the Journey On podcast, the pandemic was the catalyst for us to make some big changes in our life. We packed up our family and moved off grid with our horses and did this whole adventure. And it started with looking at things a little differently. And then doing that, going on that adventure, going on that journey, created more space to start looking at things a lot differently. And then the more we were looking at things differently, the more we started doing things differently and then seeing things even more differently. It was just like this ripple effect. When we were doing that, and kind of relating to our horses different, relating to our kids different. We have 3 teenagers, relating to ourselves different in terms of, our marriage. We started reaching out to see if there was like somebody else out there going through these changes, because there was so much around, let's just get back to normal. Let's just in terms of the pandemic, a lot of the narrative was like, just let's get back to normal. Let's do things. And we were kind of like, we're like on this journey right now. We're kind of digging it. It's really hard and pretty weird, but we're like in it and we're invested now. But one of the voices we heard during the pandemic was your podcast. We found the Journey On podcast. And the first one I listened to was when you talked to Rupert.
You chose a good one to start
right?
with. That'll keep you interested.
Exactly. And one of the reasons I clicked on that one was I had read Rupert's work and kind of became a fan of his work years before, when like 10 years before our youngest son received an autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. And so I started, doing all the research and came upon Rupert and Horseboy method and, did a lot of that work. And so, yes, I loved your podcast. And I loved your conversation with Rupert. It was kind of like mind blowing. And it was so great to hear just you talking in that intimate way with him. And then we were listening to more and we were like, oh my gosh, we other people are starting to look at these things, the same things that we are looking at in some of the same ways. And it just like, in terms of the language, like the attunement stuff, connection is all about, or safety is all about connection and how that relates to horses and how that relates to raising kids and how that relates to being in relationships with other humans and horses and the natural world. It just was connected everywhere. But I wonder about what the inspiration for your podcast was, how you decided to go that route. I'm just curious how that came about.
Well, the podcast was my wife's idea. And she said, we're at home during COVID, she said, you could do a podcast. And what you could do is do it like the Dr. Laura call-in show, like people call in with their horse problems and you answer that, you'd have to record them all at different times and just put it into one podcast session, but you could do that. And I said, well, the trouble with that is most of the time I wouldn't be able to answer their question because they view the world differently than I view the world. They view the problem differently than I view the problem. I said, well, I could do that, but what I'll do, so the first episode of the podcast I recorded was called Changes. And I talked about some of the stuff we've talked about here, the Brene Brown stuff, the Sherlock the horse, the Mustang, those sorts of things. So the first episode was called Changes. Then I thought, well, hang on, I need to talk a bit more about that. So I did the next episode, which was called The Science of Connection. And it was about polyvagal theory and how attunement soothes the nervous system. And, you can't train any horse or human who's in an anxious state. So it's a starting point sort of thing. So they were the first two episodes. And then basically then I thought this friend of ours, Jane Pike from New Zealand, who's an equestrian mindset coach, she's cool. Let's get her on there. Well, Jane came on there, and Jane was an aid worker for years. She tells stories about being in a jungle with a passport duct taped to her chest in case the tsunami washes them away in the middle of the night. And she's lived in ashrams and all sorts. And after I had that conversation with Jane on the podcast, I'm like, I want more of that. And so then I just started having conversations, finding people like that. And I'd say the first, I don't know, maybe 10, 12, 15, I don't know how many, were people I already knew, like Jane. And then maybe through some of them, I found other people, or there was people I knew of, like say Mark Rashid. I'd met Mark one time at a horse expo for 5 minutes. And I thought, yeah, he's kind of I think he's kind of got a cool story. And so when we first wanted to do the podcast, like, what are we going to call this thing? Well, there's a guy from South Africa that follows my stuff, and he's a musician, and he'd written a song called Journey On. And it's what's now the podcast song, because I said to Tyler, so we need some music for the start of it. And then I'm like, hang on, there's that song that South African bloke sent us. And the first line is Journey On, the magic lies within the trails we ride. And it says Journey On, the lightness you seek is by your side. Then it says, when everything that's shut down is coming back to life, just because he knows that you know. And it's like, that's the stuff right there. So I contacted him and said, hey, I'm going to start a podcast up. Can we use your song? And he said, yeah. And then we're like, we've got to come up with a name for the podcast. And the song's Journey On. I'm like, let's just call it the Journey On podcast. And that was the birth of the whole thing. And then we just started having amazing guests, and we're up to, I don't know, we're probably up to about 130 or so now. And we're getting close to about 3 million downloads on it. And it's just, it's taken kind of on a life of its own, which is good. It's the stuff that I really, really love, like the deep conversations about, all sorts of things. Most of it leads back to spiritual things and the woo stuff. But yeah, we've been just fortunate to have, amazing guests on there.
Are you surprised by the response, by the success and the popularity of it?
Yes. But then I kind of look at it like, well, obviously, and I hear it all the time. People are like, just like you guys, we were searching for something like this. It's kind of like the secret that everybody holds inside them, that I wish we could have conversations like this.
Yeah.
And there's a whole group of people that would love to be kind of in that space on a day-to-day basis. And so it's kind of like that place they can go to where they can be in those conversations. But yeah, I'm totally surprised it took off. But I'm totally surprised I started doing clinics around the world. I'm totally surprised I end up having an online video library that's my main business. This was another one of those things, like, just go where the path leads you.
That's interesting, because I'm just still thinking back to, I still can't quite wrap my head around how you said you're taking the easy routes, and then it just dawned on me that maybe they're not. You just didn't put up resistance. Maybe what I view as some of the challenges, because I tend to be more like in my head and resist stuff. So when I envy you and just like going with it and sort of allowing,
removing the brace.
Maybe that's back to your horsemanship principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, think about hard things, like things that scare me, or, I've been in a bit of a shutdown, hypo-arousal state most of my life. So I've not had access to a lot of explosive energy, put it that way. I've been kind of like floppy all my life. So, like working out and things like that, that's hard. Like what I've realized now is if I've done something like physical and it starts to get painful, my brain says, oh, well, I shouldn't be doing that. When it starts to hurt, I would stop. Now I realize that's the start of that's what tells you that's what you should be doing.
Is how you ended up doing the Journey on Summit, just like deciding to get all those folks in one spot and just party on together.
I think one day my wife and I were talking like, how cool would it be if you had some of those people in a room together? Like, and then we're like, well, hang on. Why not? Why keep that to ourselves? How would it be if you had those people in a room presenting to a room full of people who want to hear what they got to say? And then one of us is like, what do we do? I think it was probably Robin's idea. Robin has lots of great ideas. Why don't we do a podcast summit? And so then we decided we're going to do it last year in San Antonio, Texas, over 3 days. And we knew that the people, so we decided we were going to have them do what we call a TIC talk. It's like a TED talk, but TED talk has copyright on it, so you can't use that. And TIC was teach, inspire, connect. And we told them, so you've got 20 minutes on stage to tell the audience your message to the world. If you had 20 minutes to tell people what you think they need to hear, that's it. Like no caveats on what you talk about. You can talk about making a good lunch. I don't care. And they all showed up and basically had the same message. And I've never experienced anything like it. So there was 250 people in the room. And for going back to that spiritual awakening thing where the floor shifted, for a couple of days leading up to the summit, I felt like the floor was moving, like I was on the deck of a boat. Okay. It was the weirdest sensation because I know the floor's not moving, but I had that feeling and I couldn't figure it out. And I think it was day 2 of the summit when I was on the microphone introducing someone. I said, I got to tell you guys, I've had this weird sensation for a couple of days where it feels like the floor's rocking. Half the room's hand shot up and said, yeah, we've been feeling it too. And some of those presenters live in the transformational space. They speak a lot, like there might be trauma therapists that speak and teach and whatever. So they've been in that space a lot. And every single one of them said, I have never, ever experienced anything like that. So it was just one of those magical things. It's when you get a group of people all vibrating at the same level in the same space. It was magical. And, Kerry Lake kicked it off the first day. She was the first speaker. And about the 18-minute mark when she's about to finish, I'm thinking, oh God, it can only go downhill from here because that was the stuff right there. Like, wow, that's such profound wisdom. It's going to go downhill. Well, it didn't. It just stayed the same. The next person rocked it. The next person rocked it. And we got to the end of the first day and everybody rocked it. And it was amazing. And so the next morning I got in the elevator because we're all stayed in the same hotel. I got in the elevator to go down. I was on the 17th floor and I got in and Kerry Lake was already in the elevator. She must have been on the floor above me. And there's only the 2 of us in the elevator. And I step in, I look at her and I kind of like shrug my shoulders like, what? And she goes, dude. And that's all we said. We slowly traveled down 17 elevators. That's all there was to say. Dude. And then the day 2 was the same. Day 3 was the same. The gatherings at nighttime were the same. It was just one of those things you can't create it. It just happens. But once again, that's just following I think the universe sent us that because we followed the path. But nothing I do is almost like you can create it. You've just it's kind of like with when I had my whatever it is, nervous breakdown, spiritual awakening, the Mustang in Texas, things like that. I did not think. So I really don't make business decisions. I did not think, you know what? I've had this bit of a spiritual awakening and the demographic for what I do is mostly 35 to 65-year-old women. And who's more looking for that? I just started sharing how I felt. It could have been, financially, it could have gone the other way. People could think this guy is a whack job talking about some of the stuff he's talking about. It didn't happen. It went the other way. But I do think I'd spent enough years in the public eye where people are like, yeah, this guy's solid. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. I believe what he's got to say. So when I started talking about some things a bit differently, instead of people going, oh, he's a wacko, they went, well, if he thinks that's interesting, let's have a look at that. It's pretty deep stuff, but, it kind of worked out that way that we started going down that path much later on in the podcast to where people were ready for it. And I think in my journey, me going down that path publicly with my training, there were a lot of people doing exactly what I started doing, but they've been doing it for 30 years and nobody looks at them because they're just weird. I'd kind of spent enough time in the public eye, competing in the reining and, retraining horses, problem horses, and having a process that people can follow. And I think I just had enough people believed what I was doing enough to where if I just added one more little strange thing, they're like, oh, well, I can handle that. And then it went from there.
That is an interesting paradox. I'm a big fan of energetics and, believe there's a lot more going on than what we can see and perceive with our senses. But I also really appreciate credibility and experience. It's more of an embodiment principle, going back to that concept of practice that we talked about. Like if I look at somebody like you, I say, he's really put his time in, and he's carefully thought about these things and from experience is speaking from his heart. I'm glad that you put it out there because you have this giant audience and you've created conversations that have rippled and have not only impacted a lot of horses around the world, but it's impacted a lot of people. And as you well know, when you dive into this relational work, it doesn't stop with you. It extends to your partner, it extends to your kids, it extends to the people you meet at the store. It just goes and kind of back into that timeless realm where it just keeps going. It just keeps replicating. It just keeps rippling across time and space. So, whatever it takes, I guess to get the medicine out there is what it takes.
Well, and I think there's a potency in sharing your truth and your journey as you're experiencing it. And I think that's what I noticed about your podcast and your newer stuff that you share, that there's an honesty, and there's also sort of a beginner's mind, a curiosity, and a hey, that's pretty cool. That's neat. And that's sort of the energy behind what you're sharing. Even in the elevator with Carrie Lake, the dude, there's something very special about being in the moment with others and sharing those aha moments or those moments of epiphany or those moments of connection and love that is healing and also very magnetic.
Yeah, you talked about the vulnerability part, sharing stuff. The thing is, there's possibly some trainers that are in the public eye that what they show that they do with horses on videos is not what they do at the barn. I always told you exactly what I do. And when I started doing things differently, I just told everybody exactly what I was now doing. It wasn't, people go, oh, you're so brave being vulnerable. I think I've always been vulnerable. And I don't mean I've been vulnerable. I've always shared exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And so when I went down this path, I'm just sharing exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. When you were talking a minute ago about, ripple effects and stuff like that, I mean, I get some crazy stories from people about things that have from maybe the podcast or maybe from the, maybe from my videos or whatever, but I get some crazy stories. But I had one in real life in New Zealand a few years ago after I'd kind of changed how I was going about things. I was presenting at this horse expo and they have a big inside Coliseum type arena. Then they have these outside arenas. And so you've got 2 or 3 demos a day and you're here and you're there. And every time you get to the arena, there's a sound booth and a roadie guy's in there, and he brings over and he puts on your microphone and wires you up. And, usually they look like rock and roll roadies sort of thing, these sound techs. And so you get to see him, and you get to see him every day, have a bit of a chat, whatever. Anyway, at this horse expo a few years ago, Sunday night, I get done with the horse expo and I get back to the hotel or whatever. And, I was checking Facebook messages or whatever. And I get a message from someone I don't know. And it says, "Hey, Warwick, it's so-and-so." It was one of the sound tech guys. I'm like thinking, that's interesting. What's he messaging me for? And he goes on to tell me that he had this elaborate plan. Let me see if I can get through this. He had this elaborate plan to commit suicide on Monday. And listening to my demos over the weekend changed his mind. And so that's the ripple effect you're talking about, where it reaches places you don't think it's going to reach.
Wow. Got the shivers like nonstop right now. That's, yeah, you say life-changing experiences, and it's like very literal when you share that story.
Yeah, and it surprised me, but it didn't surprise me. Yeah, and I hear, and at horse expos, I was at a horse expo in California here recently, and I ran into a horse trainer who I knew years ago when I was competing in the reining and stuff, who back then she was quite woo, but she was internally woo. She didn't talk about it because no one was, no one was ready for that. And I haven't seen her for, I don't know, probably since 2008, maybe. No, I was in Australia then, maybe 2004, something like that. And so she sat down in the booth with me for a while chatting, and there's people coming up. I've got someone working in the booth for me selling books, and then I'm signing the books after the people sell them, and we're chatting away about things. And there's this girl that walks by down the aisleway, and she kind of looks at me and then has this look on her face and then kind of scurries off. Anyway, a little while later, she comes back by and she looks at me and then she scurries off. And I said to this horse trainer I was talking to, I said, "I guarantee you, if you stick around in the next half an hour, that girl is going to come back here. She's going to walk up to this table and she's going to bawl her eyes out." And she said, "Really?" And I said, I know the look. I know the look on their face." Anyway, here, a little while later, the lady didn't want to stand in line, I don't think. Line dwindles down, there's no one at the desk, and she comes walking up to the booth, and I just get up out of the chair, walk around the table and just walk up to her and just give her a big hug. And she starts bawling her eyes out. And I just give her a big hug and I said, "Yeah, it's okay." And she's wanting to talk, and I'm like, "I get it. Yeah, I totally get it. Totally get it." Big long hug. Anyway, then she's all good, and then she leaves, and the trainer says, "What was that about?" And I said, "There is something that I have done or said, or a podcast guest I've had, something to do with me, but it's not about me, but something to do with me has drastically affected that lady's life. Something I've done, said, something I've shared, a podcast guest I've had has given her probably a perspective shift that has led her to other perspective shifts, that has led her to other perspective shifts, that has totally changed her life." And I said, "It's not about me. I just know that something I've done has kind of led her down a rabbit hole, and then she's gone much further down rabbit holes. And just, when she sees me, it's not about, oh, there's Warwick Schiller. It's like, that's the catalyst for this change that I've had." And the other thing this trainer noticed, a lot of people come up, "Hey, can we get a selfie with you?" Like, "Sure." And I jump up out of the chair, and like this was constant for kind of hours, and at the horse expos, it kind of goes on all day. And she says, "Do you ever get sick of that?" And I'm like, "No, actually, because those people have been inspired by something I'm connected with. It might be that they listen to this podcast and it inspires them. I may be on someone else's podcast. It might have been a podcast guest of mine. It might have been a video I did. It might have been a little clip I put on TikTok, whatever." And I said, there's something about, they have this perception about the connectedness of everything we're doing here. And I said, it makes their day. If they can get a selfie with me, they go away and they've got a piece of that energy. And I said, you wouldn't deny someone that. Like, all I've got to do is get out of my chair, go over, get in the selfie and go, hey, smile. And away I go. And I said, I know it's not about me. It's nothing to do with me. And I said, I'll do that all day long. If I can make someone's day and they walk away with that energy and they're like, whew, they're buzzing, who would not give that gift to somebody? I do think, though, you've got to be able to, the big thing is, I know it's not about me. And so otherwise, if you did that all day and you thought it was about you, you could end up in that grandiosity end of that scale,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about the grandiosity on one end and the sort of self-doubt and questioning on the other end. And I was thinking, that's also like another way to think about harmony, finding that middle spot. And yeah, I think we think about harmony as being like the butterflies and rainbows, but no, it's actually the work of like finding that space in between. And what I hear you saying when you come into contact with some of these folks who have been impacted by your work, I go back to what we noticed, which was that it was incredibly affirming, and we felt seen, and we felt also connected. And that goes back to your whole thing, which is attuned horsemanship, right? Like that's it. That's attunement. If I could just get you to sort of encapsulate that, obviously that's what we've been talking about, but what is attuned horsemanship to you? Like, what does that mean in terms of horsemanship or the bigger picture? How is that container like how you contain your message?
Well, the attunement is, it's the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, getting gotten, all that stuff. But what it does, if you think about nervous system states, if you think about, say, training horses, so think about the 3 Fs that people talk about a lot, fight, flight, freeze. Well, there's another F that comes before that all mammals do when something arises. And the first one is friend. Can I seek out a friend?
Right.
And if that's not available, connection. If that's not available, then you're into flight, fight, freeze. And most horse training skips the friend bit.
Right.
So they're already in fight, flight, or freeze. And people do a lot of stuff trying to get their horse to stay near them. Teaching them to, you put pressure on them when they're away from you and rest where you are, any of that sort of stuff. But what people have to realize is horses would want to hang around us as much as they want to hang around other horses. If we can provide what those other horses provide, and it's not a physical sense of safety, it's a sense of awareness. They want to hang around with other aware, sentient beings to share what I call the awareness burden. That's what that Mustang did at the clinic when he lay down, is like, this guy has communicated to me, he notices little stuff. And if he notices little stuff, then I trust him enough to notice things out there that might be a danger. And he seems pretty alert right now, so I might take this time to have a little nap. And so the attunement is having that whole, what attunement does for the whole thing is the horses want to hang around you. They want to be around you, and they're quite, once you get that working, they're quite happy to do anything you might want to try to teach them without any grace to it. And so I start out with the connection stuff, and then I try to incorporate that into the training. I layer the training on top of that. I remember there's an old Ray Hunt story about Ray Hunt doing this 3-day clinic years ago, and there was an older gentleman watching the clinic, and at the end of the clinic, he says, "Hey, Ray," he says, "I got a question." He says, mostly you were working on like step 1 stuff right here. He says, I'm more of a intermediate rider. So, so when do you actually leave step 1? And Ray said, well, you don't leave step 1, you take it with you. And for me, it's the same thing with this connection and attunement stuff. You don't do that and then now I'm a horse trainer. You do that, and then it's a part of your horse training. You know, they talk about in training horses, you know, you say you reward the slightest try. Okay, that's pretty simple. Everybody knows that one. But when you reward that slightest try, not only are you rewarding the try, you're communicating your awareness of that try. So the slighter the things you can reward, the more you're communicating your awareness, and the safer they feel around you. And then there's no brace and they're open. I'll give you a really good example about having the attunement as part of the training. So I was at a clinic in Arizona a few years ago, and this lady was riding a mule, and he'd spent the night there the night before. And when she came in the arena, she hops on her mule. I'm standing in the arena, and she's on her mule trying to talk to me, and this mule's trying to leave, and she's pulling on the left rein and right rein, and this mule's mouth's wide open, and like, it just looks like a wrestle. And I said, "Can I get on him for a second?" She said, "Sure." And I hop on and just turn loose of the reins, and he just turns and makes a beeline back towards the gate, back towards the barn where he spent last night. Okay. And I said, "Okay, he seems to be wanting to go back here." And he was kind of pacing up and down the fence, looking out over the fence, just pacing back and forth. And I still haven't touched the reins yet. And his ears are pricked over the fence. And I said, "So what I'm going to do here, as he's walking along, say the fence is on his left side, I'm going to pick up on this right rein. And what I'm looking for is that right ear to flick in that direction. So his thoughts to come off his friend and over here." So we walk down the fence is on his left. I pick up on the right rein. That right ear doesn't flick. But as we turn, he turns towards the fence to go back the other way. As his right ear goes that way, because his friend is now on that side, as his ear comes that way, I drop the rein. And I do this over and over and over. And after a while, when he's walking along, if his ears are to the left over the fence, I can pick up the right rein and the ear flicks towards me. And as that ear flicks towards me, I drop that rein over and over and over until as I pick up on the rein, that ear comes. Okay. And all I've been doing is communicating my awareness of his thoughts. I couldn't even get his thoughts to go over there, but I had an ask on that right rein. And when he turned into the fence and his friend's now on the right, as that ear came, which means as his thoughts switched from his left side to his right side, I dropped that rein. After a while, I can get his thoughts to follow that. And then after a while, I can pick up on that right rein. If the fence is on his left, I can pick up on the right rein. His ear comes, and if I leave my hand there, his thoughts come and his feet come. So now I'm steering him, just really light reins, you know. And I said, "So you get the idea? I want you to just mess with this." And I'm not steering him away from it. You know, I'm not trying to go away from that end. I'm just trying to get him to where his thoughts and his head and his feet will kind of follow that rein for one step. And so I said, "Okay, you got the idea. Go ahead and hop on." So she hops on, and I go helping somebody else. And probably 15 minutes later, she goes, "Hey, look at this." And he is walking straight down the arena, away from that end of the arena on a completely loose rein. And it's a nice forward, like trail riding sort of walk. And I said, "That's cool." She goes, "Have a look at his ears." And his ears are doing that mule flop thing. She said, I've had him for 10 years and his ears never flop in the arena. They only ever flop on the trail. Okay. Like a miracle's happened. And the only thing I did was communicate my awareness of his change in focus. And, so that would be I was training him, but I was training him with connection. I was training him with attunement. I was asking for something. This wasn't just, I'm going to, like with the Mustang, I wasn't asking for something. I was stepping somewhere and he said, no. I said, "Oh, I saw that," and stepped back. But this was actually asking for something, but I was asking for something pretty small. And yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll give you another good example. A couple of years ago at a clinic, a lady said, "Oh, my horse," before the clinic, she said, "My horse hates men." Like, he was a Charo horse. He's had some nasty stuff done to him, and he absolutely hates men, like won't let men anywhere near him. And the arena was about 100 feet wide, 200 feet long, and the gate was in the middle on the side. And when I stepped in the arena for their session, that horse was opposite the gate on the other side of the arena. The lady's standing there with him. So he's 100 feet away. Before I stepped in the gate, I looked across the arena and saw where that horse's focus was, what it was doing. And as I stepped in the gate and stepped towards him, he went, he snorted and looked away. I'm 100 feet away. And when he did that, I stopped and stepped backwards. I said, "Oh, there's a line there that I just crossed. Sorry about that." And then I waited till he was more relaxed. And then I started walking towards him, and I got 2-3 steps towards him, and he snorted and looked away. So then I stepped back. And this happened till about halfway across the arena. So now I'm about halfway across the arena. Every time he's gone, "Ooh, are you coming over here? You scare me." I would say, "I saw that. I'll give you some space to reset," But after about halfway, when I stepped towards him, instead of snorting and looking away, he went from not looking at me to looking at me with like curious, like with his ears pricked. And what I would do then, as he looked at me, I'd stop, and then I'd wait till he wasn't looking at me and was kind of just hanging out. Then I'd take another step, and he'd look at me, and I'd stop. So initially I was communicating my awareness of his concern, but in the end, there's no concern. Now I'm communicating my awareness of his change in focus. So I didn't step towards him when he was already looking at me, because there's nothing to change. I'm waiting till he's not looking at me. Then I step towards him and he looks at me. So I walk all the way over, and I end up getting up to him, and he reaches out, sniffs my hand, and I rub on him, and he's kind of cool with it. And I said, "Just stay there." So I walk down the other end of the arena, the long end. On the end, she's on the side, to help somebody else. And then I get done. I start to walk down the arena to the other end where the third person is. And as I'm walking down the arena, this horse drags his owner across the arena over to me to come up and say hi. And this is a horse that hates men. And I actually, at the time, when he walked up to me and said hi, I said, "And you said he hates men?" And she said, "Yes." And so I kind of turned around and kind of opened up the front of my pants and looked down there to make sure, I was still a man, and it was all still there, which means he doesn't hate men. Maybe he hates the energy or whatever. But yeah, that was like a huge change in a horse. And all I did was communicate my awareness of him. And I've just spent the last couple of days in Kentucky at Dan James's Liberty Festival, but two of the other presenters there were actually two podcast guests. One's Ben Atkinson from England, and one is Ty Murray. And something that Ty said in the podcast, when I had him on the podcast, that we didn't really get to unpack, because he said it and then we went on to something else. I didn't get to revisit it, but he said, "You need to become aware of them the moment they become aware of you." Mm-hmm. It's like, that's so true. Like, if they're out in the pasture and you step out the back door of the house and their head pops up and looks at you, you need to be aware that they looked at you and they know that you noticed them. And if they notice that you didn't notice them and you're in your head about stuff, that's setting the scene for the day. I think the sense of safety with horses is, your sense of awareness. And the more you can communicate your sense of awareness to them, the more relaxed they are. And I think, initially it starts out communicating your awareness of their awareness, but then I think it goes to communicating your awareness of their awareness, of your awareness, of their awareness,
Yes.
of your awareness, of their awareness, of your awareness, of their awareness. I mean, and so I try to, you're asking about the attunement stuff. I try to incorporate that in everything I do in the training process, but I have created that safety before I start training.
Yeah. And you actually, I'm so glad you talk about that, because in your book, The Principles of Training, there's a passage where you talk about Ray Hunt's quote,
"They know when you know and they know when you don't." Yeah.
Yes. Ty Murray said it. That's the principle of attunement that you're talking about. There was a line, I think, in the podcast intro music, your podcast intro music, something about that.
When everything that's shut down is coming back to life just because they know that you know.
Yeah. Like there's some conciliant wisdom there. Yes.
Yeah. And that Ray Hunt quote, I used to think it meant they know, it's they know when you know and they know when you don't. I thought it meant they know when you know what you're doing and they know when you don't. They know when you know how to train a horse and they know when you don't. But a number of years ago, I was reading an article by someone who was around Ray Hunt a lot. It said, Ray Hunt says they know when you know and know when you don't. And they said, when you're around a horse, you need to be aware of what his ears are doing, what his eyes are doing, what his nostrils doing, what his muzzle's doing, what his breathing's doing, what his back's doing, what his tail's doing. Is it up? Is it clamped? Is it loose? What his feet are doing? Is he standing square? Is he standing crooked? And you need to know all that stuff because they know when you know and they know when you don't. So basically they know when you are present. And that's, like equine assisted therapy and healing and that sort of stuff. That's it right there. You've got to be present when you're around them. For it to work well, you've got to be present. And a lot of our mental health issues are because we're either, it's like Lao Tzu said in 800 BC, if you're depressed, you're living in the past. If you're anxious, you're living in the future. And if you are peaceful, you are in the present. And that's one of the prerequisites of getting along well with horses. And so I know there's lots of equine assisted therapy, and I think it's great, but I have actually found that there's a lot of therapy in just working with horses the right way.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, how would you say shame affects our work with horses?
Well, it's just your internal self-talk. It's the not good enough, it's the not this, it's the not that, it's the I should have done it wrong. I mean, I should have done it a different way, and I'm stupid. And that's where Brene Brown comes into it. Brene Brown talks about the difference between guilt and shame, and shame is a focus on self and guilt is a focus on behavior. And so if you do something and you say, oh God, you're so stupid, that's shame. That lives within you. That becomes a part of you. Whereas if you do something wrong and you go, that was so stupid, not I'm stupid, the thing I just did was stupid, that's guilt. And you can change. That means, oh, I've got a chance to do that differently next time. But when you have that, I am stupid, that lives within your soul, that lives inside you. And so I think, these days helping people with their horses, for the most part, I'm trying to help them sort out their stuff, because that's the reason they're not getting along with their horse, or they're having trouble doing things, is because of your perception, your energy, your negative self-talk, especially your perceptions. What you perceive is what actually happens, because you interact with it and cause things to happen. And I told a story at the Liberty Festival the other day. I saw a video here a little while ago. It's by a soldier who was in like Iraq or Afghanistan or something, and he's a Marine, I think, and they pull into this village in their Humvee at the start of the conflict, and they're going to patrol this village. And as they drive down the street in their Humvee, all these old, let's say they're Afghanis, villagers are standing there, and as the Humvee drives by, they get flipped the bird. So their hand is like this, their middle finger's up like that, and as they walk by, these old guys watch them drive by, and they're like, these old jerks are flipping us the bird, So they're there for a couple of days. They haven't really done anything yet. They're looking for an interpreter, and they're going to start patrolling. So they finally get an interpreter. But in these couple of days, everybody is flipping the bird. And they get this interpreter, and they tell him what they're going to do, and he speaks English and Farsi or whatever. And so they're going to go out and patrol. And before they leave on patrol, he looks at him and he says, "Be gentle." And that's the Afghani, symbol for be gentle. So if people are listening to this and not watching it, just flip the bird, but then take your index finger and fold it down so the knuckle of your, so only the first joint of your finger sticking in the air. So think about this. This guy's perception is these villagers are telling him to get lost, piss off, flipping him the bird. How are his interactions with these people going to be based on his perception of that? And then think about when the interpreter did the same signal and said, "Be gentle." Now he's thinking, when I've been driving through this village and these guys have been looking at me like that, they haven't been saying get lost. They're saying, basically, we're glad you're here, but can you be gentle with us? Mm-hmm. And that perception change right there with our horses, like trying to get people to look at their horses differently. I read a book recently by a British, he's like maybe he's a naturalist or something, and it was called Being a Human, 40,000 Adventures in 40,000 Years of Consciousness. And he lives in the north of England for a time as a hunter-gatherer, lives in the woods in the north of England. And he's telling his story in this book. And he says, now he's talking about the trees. And he says, you know what? I've never really seen a tree. As a matter of fact, it's been a long time since I've seen anything. Because I know a lot about trees, when I look at a tree, the light reflects off the tree into my retina, and then I analyze what kind of tree it is, what disease it has. Is it deciduous? Okay, what funguses it gets. But I don't see the tree. I just have a lot of facts and figures about the tree. He said, I once met a man who could see a tree, and it scared me so much, I ran out of that temple, hiked back to Kathmandu, and took the first plane home. Like, I saw a man who could see a tree. Look at something without a story attached to it and see exactly what's in front of it. And a lot of people don't see a horse. They see their hopes, their dreams, their disappointments, their ambitions. They project what they think's going on onto the horse and then interact with them in that way. And so the outcome is based on that, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. We see it all the time. That's helpful. What's on your reverse bucket list next?
Well, I just had one. I haven't added it yet. But last weekend at that Liberty Festival, hanging out with, I grew up like with a bit of a rodeo background. So, Ty Murray is like the king of the cowboys sort of thing.
Right.
And so I got to hang out with him and his wife last weekend. And also Ben Atkinson, who I've had on the podcast, the guy from England. He's so inspirational. I got to hang out with those two last weekend. And that's definitely a reverse bucket list item. And not just to get to hang out with them, but to get to hang out with them and come away with the impression that these are some absolutely stellar human beings. They say you should never meet your heroes, but I don't necessarily think that's true. That was, well, what's on my reverse bucket list? I don't have a reverse bucket list. You got to remember, something happens and I go, that's cool enough to put on a bucket list, and I'm going to add it. So I don't really have anything on my reverse bucket list. I just have an open reverse bucket list. And yes, I think hanging with Ben and Ty last weekend is definitely a reverse bucket list item. Actually, it's so cool. So my parents so Ty's parents came with him to this thing. Like, they do everything as a family. Ty's parents are 84 and 82, I think, and the same age as my parents. My parents wouldn't know how to find a podcast. They don't have a smartphone. Wouldn't even know what a podcast is really. And so I meet Ty's dad the other day. So I've met Ty Murray, and then he takes me over and introduces me to his dad. And the first thing his dad says, "Oh, I love the podcast you did with Ty. That was really good. I tell you what, I loved it so much. I made you a set of spur straps. Here, let me go get them for you." Like, Ty Murray's dad made me a set of spur straps. I'm like, okay, that goes on reverse bucket list too.
Yep.
That's very special.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just telling Josh, of course he's heard of Ty Murray, but I grew up doing rodeo too. And, I think I was coming of age in the scene when Ty Murray was at the pinnacle of like his just like cool dudeness and cool cowboyness. So yeah, I totally get that. And it is very cool after listening to him on your podcast. And now I follow him on social. It's just like, what a great guy. What a cool person.
Yeah, and the thing about Ty, like if you're involved in the rodeo world, okay, he was Ty Murray. He was the best at that thing, but he transmuted it. He went into public consciousness. He played himself on an episode of CSI. He played himself on an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger.
That's right.
Wow. He was on Dancing with the Stars. He was in
my God, I forgot about that. Yeah.
He was in a Bud Light commercial with Burt Reynolds. He was married to Jewel, the singer Jewel.
That's what that was a big deal.
Like he went way beyond the whole horse thing, the rodeo world, the Western world. Like, he was a public figure. And the thing, I over the years understanding trauma and how it works, and I realized that a lot of people that are successful because of their traumas. You know what I mean? They maybe they're, I had a guest on the podcast, a trauma therapist from Canada, and she's talking about coping privilege. There's white privilege, there's male privilege, there's all sorts of privileges, and there's coping privilege. And what that means is, let's say you have two brothers grow up and they're wired the same. They grow up they're not wired the same, but they grow up in exactly the same household, are exposed to exactly the same traumas. And let's say one of them, he didn't get enough attention from his parents or whatever. And so the way he's wired to deal with that is to achieve. Like, I want to do things so that my dad pays attention to me or whatever. And he ends up a CEO, but his brother, his way of dealing with that is to go inside his head and be depressed, and he ends up a heroin addict. One's a CEO and the world thinks he's successful, and one's a heroin addict and the world thinks he's a loser, and they both got to those places from the same trauma. Some people just have coping privilege, where the way they cope actually makes them successful in life. And Ty Murray being as successful as he had, I'd been wondering if that was it there, but I do not get the sense at all that there's any of that. He's fascinating because I don't think he does anything for external validation, never has. Like, he's wanted to do what he did since he was 2 years old. You know what I mean? And he holds himself to a very high standard. And he holds others to a very high standard too. But yeah, for me, being around him and getting to know him, the only reason he does things is because he does things to hold himself to his own standards. He's not doing it for anybody else. And it's really interesting to be around someone that successful that just doesn't seem to have just some stuff in there. You know what I mean? It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of fun.
Mm.
So we just have a few more questions before we finish up, but for those who have been living under a rock and don't know how to find you or engage with your work, or check out what you're up to next, how best should people get in touch with you or check out what you do?
Well, I have a website. That's www.warwickschiller.com. I have social media. So I have a Facebook page, which I think is Warwick Schiller Attuned Horsemanship. I have a Facebook private group that's Warwick Schiller Attuned Horsemanship. And then, those things are if you actually want to dive into learning about how I go about doing things with horses. But if you're interested in just a different outlook on life, I'd say the podcast is a great place to go. I have some guests on there that'll just blow your mind. Like, I'm continuously having my mind blown. But those are the two places. If you've got questions, you can email me off of the website.
Sounds good. So if you had to distill what's important about horses down to just 3 things, what would those 3 things be?
As far as what we get from horses?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, the more I get into their really woo stuff like that, I'm really starting to think that horses are this advanced being who have been sent here to teach us how to be fully operational like we're supposed to be. If you really want to get woo about it. But I think the great thing about horses is they inspire people. Okay. People are passionate about horses. And I've had you touched on it. One of you touched on it before about, not only does this stuff affect the horses, but it affects the husbands and the wives and the kids and the whatever. And I've had so many people say, you know what, since I started following your work with the horses, not only have my horses got better, but my relationship with my husband's got better, and my relationship with my boss and my coworkers. And I guarantee you they've been married to that guy for 30 years and not done the work to make that relationship better, but they will put the work in if my relationship with my horse will be better. So I think that's one of the, they're big, they're powerful, they're majestic, they're quiet, they're soft, they're whatever. But all those things that a horse has that attracts people, that's the catch, like they bring you in, and then the more you want out of them, the more you've got to change. And I really think that's the great thing about horses is they will, what you said earlier on in the podcast, like looking back about the stupid things you've done, horses will put up with all sorts of stupid stuff. They will meet you where you are at, and they will take it. Okay. They're very stoic that way. If you need to be stoic and just put up with your stuff, I'll do that. And as you evolve and look at things differently, they will evolve along with you. I think they really do a great job of that. They don't hold a grudge. Like, you be better, I be better. So when your perspective of them changes, the horse itself actually changes.
Wow, that was a really beautiful, Warwick.
Yeah.
I love what you said about just the different intelligences. I know, like, I've, like a lot of folks tend to think humans are so darn intelligent. Like, we got our frontal part of our brain that thinks about things and designs things. And I know horses appreciate that because we've engineered how to grow hay and harvest it and turn it into hay bales and stuff. But just that whole concept of, what is intelligence, and what if horses really were like this super intelligent? It doesn't just have to be horses. I mean, it could be the mountain, it could be, your dog, it could be the tree, it could be almost anything sentient or unsentient. Expanding that concept of intelligence, I think, is really a healthy thing for us humans. So I appreciate you brought that up.
Where I'm at in my journey, I'm almost at the point where I believe that everything has a level of sentience to it. It's not sentient and non-sentient. It's just levels of sentient. I had a Native American Lakota woman named Jessica Whiteplume on the podcast here a couple of years ago, and she was talking about the horse nation, but then she was talking about the standing silent nation. And I said, "What's that?" She goes, "Well, the trees and the plants, like that, they're a sentient being, and they stand there and they watch us." But Jane Pike was here recently with Rupert Isaacs, and they did a retreat at our place. And then the Monday after the retreat, we did this online thing, and in that, Jane was talking about when you're in nature, when you're walking in nature, not only are you seeing nature, you're being seen by nature. When you are feeling nature, you're being felt by nature. And when you are hearing nature, you are being heard by nature. And it's like, wow, that's profound. But I do believe that there's a level of sentience to everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
For me, it's really interesting because, I was 50 before I even started thinking about anything differently, and I'm now 57. So it's been a sharp upward curve. But I remember when I was 49. And when I was 49, I was right. What I knew, I knew. And so it's, for me, I look at somebody who's where I was at when I was 49, and I do not judge them poorly at all. Like, hey, that's what you know. That's where you're at. And you might stay there, you might develop past that, but it takes the judgment out of it. Whereas some people, if you've had a lifelong journey and you don't notice the changes happening, they just, you change so slowly that you don't even realize you're changing. It might be easier to look at somebody and kind of judge them. But I remember when I was right. But yeah, so I think that having that sharp upward turn is actually helpful for me, because I can look at somebody else and be totally down with where they're at with no judgment at all.
I wonder if I could just add to one of our wrap-up questions. What inspires you to keep doing what you're doing, and especially at the pace you're going? Like I said, I listed off just some of the things you've done in the last 2 weeks, which is more than a lot of folks will do in 5 years. And yet, and I know you just came back from that big conference. I know when we just do a little clinic with people we know really well in our hometown, I'm pretty wiped out, like, for a couple of days. And I just need to, I just kind of like to tune out. And you join us on this podcast, when we emailed you, I didn't even think you'd probably do it, because this isn't a most viewed podcast in the world. And yet you came and you sat down and talking with us for a couple of hours here. Plus, like, what is it that keeps you going?
How long have you got? You got time for a story?
Yeah, of course. I love your
Okay, well,
stories.
I have a crazy story. So about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe only 3 years ago, 4 years, something like that. So things were going kind of like they are now, heading in a direction. And, I had, I don't know, maybe 22 million views on my YouTube channel, something like that. I get emails all the time. "Oh my goodness, you've changed my life," and yada, yada. I'm getting all those sorts of things. And my wife had some friends of hers suggest she goes and see this astrologer. And I was away. I was in Australia, I think. And Robin goes and sees this astrologer, and the astrologer records the whole conversation. And that night I didn't even know she was going. And that night she says, "I went and saw an astrologer today." I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "You wouldn't believe what this woman told me. I've got it all recorded. You need to listen when you come home." So I come home and I'm like, wow, I'm going to go see her. So I make an appointment, go see her. And she's reading my charts and she's like, ooh, Ooh, this is interesting. It's the wounded healer archetype. She says, you know, I rarely ever see this, but your charts are telling me from the moment of your birth, your whole purpose here on this planet has to be is been to gather hundreds of thousands of people and lead them towards consciousness. And I'm like, that's a bit heavy. I'm just a horse trainer, you know. But she keeps talking about it, and by the end of the whole thing, like, I'm down. Like, I'm believing it. And then I leave there. And when I leave there, I'm like, hang on. I had to tell her my full name. You know, in order to do it, you got to have your date of birth, place of birth, and time of birth, and your name, of course. She's Googled me. Like, it's a scam. She's Googled me. She couldn't, she can't get that off the charts, you know. And if you don't know this already, if the universe has a plan for you and you don't listen to the message, it will send you a bigger message, and it will keep sending you messages until you get the message. When I get into those places where I'm like, you know, well, I should really go down this rabbit hole. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm supposed to go down this rabbit hole. I'm just going to, this is okay. People might think I'm weird, but I'm going down this rabbit hole. But so, and it's, yeah, I said before, I've ended up at this point in life through always taking the easy way out. So I think some higher power wanted me in this place sharing whatever I'm sharing, but it's not, I'm not sharing. It's not about me. It's about helping people think about things a different way. Maybe, leading them towards consciousness. I think the horses are leading them towards consciousness. I'm just here to maybe help that out a bit. But yeah, so I forget exactly what the question was that maybe tell you that's those stories, but
Matt, I think you answered it. Yeah.
We got it.
Hey, not only did you get it, I got it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can feel it, like it explains the pace that you're.
Well, so the
moving.
thing is, I seem to have arrived at that point through Providence, like things have just happened for me, and things keep happening that seem to be all pointing in that direction. So, I mean, really, that's what the podcast is. The podcast is definitely, you asked me earlier about, are you surprised about the podcast or whatever? And I'm like, not really, because it seems to be following that line of thought right there.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Have you ever heard of that Zen parable? It's a sequence of events of the stages of enlightenment. And he keeps going back to the master, and then he keeps sending him off to stay on the journey, keep learning. And the culmination of it is the last silkscreen painting is the seeker in the village, just with his hands out, just head down, hands out, just helping the people in the village. And that was the culmination of his lifelong journey. And if I could just share a story about our friend Barb, we interviewed her early on because she's one of our dear friends. She's in our horse program here locally. We're really fortunate because we get to work with people who I feel like I'm being mentored by when we're helping them because they need help with their horses. They're just like very wise, evolved people. So it's really a privilege to get to work with them. And we were sitting right back here, and Barb is a parent coach. She's just retired. She was one of the first parent coaches. She helped put it on the map. Like, she tells stories of going to conferences with a table and like saying parent coach, and people are like, what the hell is a parent coach? And I was kind of wrapping up, having a nice conversation. And I was sitting there and she's sitting there with her smile. And all of a sudden I could see without seeing, I could feel the impact she'd had on the people. And like it filled the room. It was actually completely overwhelming. I had to take a minute. And it was like I could see all the people, and maybe because it was children, I just felt very generational, like it just extended. I was thinking of how when you interrupt those stories, when you interrupt a trauma pattern, how you don't just help for that person, you're they have now, maybe that's been going on in their family for 6 generations, now you've interrupted that. And, it goes back to the ripple concept that we talked about before. So, and when you told the story about the sound tech, you talk about the selflessness aspect of it. And I see that and I feel that talking to you. I can feel, your room is full with those lives that you're touching, and I can feel that's what's driving you. I'm sure you could probably slow down and take it a little more easy around your home ranch if you really wanted to, but something's driving you. And I was curious what that was, and because sometimes people are driven for other reasons, and it's not always this deep within part. It's almost like running from something, or like trying to stay busy because you don't want to, face things or whatever. And I just love hearing that about you and your journey, and these people that you feel like you're impacting, and these sort of transcendent, almost mystical messages that you've gotten, that this is bigger than you, and you need to do this, or we're going to keep letting you know.
There is a bit of that to it. I first started, I said I first started putting, say, videos on YouTube and on social media and stuff because I kind of wanted to help people. But then there's the positive feedback you get. And I think for a while there, kind of when my son was in his kind of teenage years, I kind of crawled into I crawled into a bit of a numbing myself out on social media, but I wasn't scrolling. I was answering, I was interacting, I was helping people. But I think there was a lot of, external validation coming back from that. And it's almost like I'm an alcoholic wine taster or something, to where my traumas actually made me successful. I was, I think I was, for a number of years there on social media, I was numbing out on social media, and my business was growing because of it. So like I said, it's like being an alcoholic wine taster. Your problem actually is your success. And it took me a number of years to figure out, I think that's what was happening. And yeah, these days I'm kind of more aware of it. Like on my computer here, we have some sort of a blocker. But anyway, I can't scroll Facebook. I can click on groups or people, look up people's names or whatever, but I don't get a Facebook feed. All you do is you get a quote every day. A news feed blocker is what it's called. And so you get an inspirational quote where the news feed would be. And then on my phone, I have an app called Opal that you can set limits on social media. And like after your time's up, it's locked. You can't get in there. And I kind of need those things because I can get a bit drawn into that stuff, especially when you're traveling too, like you're sitting in an airport forever or whatever, in a taxi or whatever, you sit there and you can scroll and you can get kind of lost in that. So I do think a part of my success has been, I've done a lot of work helping people, but it was I think it was numbing out at the same time. So I'm just more aware of that these days. And I at some point in time, I probably will not be on social media at all. I will still create content.
Our son, who's our 16-year-old son, he started using some of those blockers, and he noticed, because, iPhone tells you your screen time. And he was like, wow, geez, I was like 7 hours on Instagram in one day.
That's cool, because your 16-year-old son went, I think this is not good for me. I'm like, as soon as you said that, it's not like you forced him to do it, but he made that choice. And I think that's the younger generation. I think they are, like, when I was 16, I couldn't have made that decision, I don't think.
I agree.
Yeah.
They have this ability to like take a step back and be a little more discerning. Our kids, their awareness and their ability to grow intrinsically is really amazing.
Yeah.
What do you put that down to?
Lots of things. I mean, this is a whole nother rabbit hole, but like, I think perhaps because of their access to information, the internet in all of its glory and its goodness and badness, I think that's part of it. It's like a fire hose, and they get to a point where I think they can sort of step outside of it and watch it. And they're like, I think I need to figure out what works for me.
Well, Jacob says, like at school, in his friend groups, even when they get together out of school, they'll sit around and look at their phones together. It's almost like that's how they bond. They're spending time together, but they're just looking at their phones. And at school, he says, you try to connect with people and they don't, there's like no connection. And he just observed, I'm just saying his experience was, he realized he was feeling less confident. He was feeling just less sure of himself. And he was able to tie that directly to his use of social media, which was fantastic. And he got one of those blockers that limits him to like 30 minutes or 45 minutes. I'm not exactly sure. And he said his happiness levels, increased. And when we were doing some research for some work we were doing around like community building, I was trying to understand some of the power behind community. The Surgeon General actually just released a huge report on the loneliness epidemic, and they had started that work before the pandemic. And the pandemic, of course, escalated that, especially for our youth, and the statistics for teenagers today. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's stunning how many people feel hopeless, how many have contemplated suicide, how many feel alone in the world. It's like we're more connected through technology, but less attuned.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the real powers of this work that we're all trying to do here too.
And our most basic need is connection. So he's able to put all that together. I'm feeling less connected the more I'm on these social platforms, and to be able to connect those dots so that he could feel more connected is pretty astounding.
We're in quite a different phase in our arc, than you are. I can't even imagine the amount of comments and stuff and not reading through those. That would be tricky because we're actually just trying to get people to comment on some of our stuff, but it is like this rabbit hole, and I find myself just on autopilot, like, what the hell? Like, what am I doing here? So it's something that you almost have to have like a monk-like level of mind control
you do.
to resist.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my son got me on TikTok a while ago because he said YouTube's going out, TikTok's going to be the place where you put content. That is a rabbit hole. You can get stuck in there, and it feeds you whatever you look at. You know what I mean? So when I get stuck in there, I'm all looking at all this spiritual stuff and people who are in the influential space sort of thing. But you could get stuck on anything that strikes your fancy. Have you ever seen that Netflix series, The Social Dilemma?
Yeah, we actually have not seen that yet, but we've been meaning to for years.
It is worth watching because it'll really make you reconsider what's going on with social media. But yeah, great. I think two of the best documentaries on Netflix I've ever watched. One was My Octopus Teacher, and one was The Social Dilemma. And they're two opposite ends of the spectrum. One is telling you how bad social media and stuff is, and the other one is, oh, we're not near as smart as we think we are. I think octopuses are they're either aliens but they're way more developed than we are.
Yeah, we saw that too. It was stunning.
We loved it. Yeah, that was amazing. Yep, that was a good one. When it comes to horses, what's someone or something you feel gratitude for?
I feel grateful to Sherlock. The horse that said, maybe you don't know as much as you think you do. And, a lot of people learn that sort of lesson because they get flipped over backwards on and break their neck or something or other. Mine was, it was pretty gentle, but yeah, I'm really grateful for Sherlock for, he's the catalyst of this whole new path that I've been on for about 7 years now. So very grateful to Sherlock.
Wow.
Beautiful.
And last question, one word to describe the kind of horse person you aspire to be.
I could give you a lot of one words. I don't know if there's one word that's more important than the other one.
There are no hard rules here.
Attuned would be one, but empathetic would be one. Courageous would be one. I think there'd be a lot of one words. Motivated would be one. I'm the other day at that Liberty Festival, we had a roundtable discussion with Ben Atkinson and Ty Murray and myself, and Dan James's wife was asking the questions. We had a room full of people, and one of them was, what's something you are, what is something you're struggling with your horse journey right now? And I said, well, I'm kind of struggling with achieving things I want to achieve in exactly the way I want to achieve them. So the things I want to do, but it's, these days I'm less concerned about what I can get a horse to do, more concerned about how they feel about it. So it's the being able to have them feel a certain way while going forward. And that's not to say, oh, you haven't been listening to them. It's like the nth degree type stuff. You know what I mean? The nth degree type things going forward, I am really, I sometimes go like, it's kind of like with Sherlock when I couldn't figure him out. I stepped back from trying to do anything. I've kind of got paralysis by analysis at the moment. Like I don't want to do it wrong, which I know, I always tell people, just do it. They'll forgive you. I'm kind of a little bit stuck right there, but I am kind of inspired after the weekend with hanging out with Ben Atkinson. I'm kind of like inspired. I'm inspired to do a lot of things. Not just with horses.
I think that's such a helpful message for folks too. Like you're not just totally screwed if you do something quote unquote wrong, that there is, they grow with you, they forgive.
Well, our friend Ty talks about asking for forgiveness before every interaction, just starting with that because we probably need it.
We could talk to you all day. I would take you up right till 5 o'clock if we could.
We take you up on the right before dinner with Robin, but this has been great.
Yeah, it's been awesome. It's fun to be on the other end, and it's fun to be on the other end with people who ask the right questions. Sometimes I've been on some other podcasts, and sometimes people just ask you superficial questions, and I love the level you guys are operating on because it's right up my alley. And so it was great to be on the other end and get asked the questions instead of asking them. And you guys seem like me, like people say, oh, you're such a good interviewer. And like, well, I don't try to be a good interviewer. I just try to be curious, and being curious about stuff is what takes the conversations in the right places.
That means a lot.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for going there with us. I mean, it's a little scary asking those types of questions to somebody you don't know that well. So thank you for being willing to answer them and go there and be vulnerable and be generous with your time and be real. Like, this has been a gift. Thank you.
It's been fun. I enjoyed the heck out of it.
Well, Warwick, thank you. I just want to take a moment, just recognize the impact you're having on the world and for people. You told a few really touching stories. I know there's probably a lot of stories that you never even hear. I can imagine that room is just full of that energy right now. And I hope you can feel that.
We do. We feel it.
I can feel it. Yeah.
We feel the people. We can almost see them.
And I just thank you for sharing your journey. I think it's a beautiful example of a hero's quest. That's what inspires us. That's what led us on the road we're on, looking at things through that lens. And hearing your story that you weren't always full of confidence sort of shocked me, actually. Yeah. But I was really glad you shared that, to go from being picked last at one point in your school or just being like the younger brother of Steve Schiller to now affecting really millions of people across the globe is just a testimony to the power of answering the calling and embarking on that quest. I hope that it's inspiring to others as it has been to us. And I really appreciate you taking time to sit down with us and share. I know some of the people that we work with are going to be very excited to hear we got to talk to you, and be able to share this message with them too is going to be really great. So thank you. I hope this is the first of many contacts together. We appreciate you and everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. While we've been going along here, I'm thinking these two are cool. I could hang with them a lot,
Well, come visit next time you're in Central Oregon.
Well, thank you so much. I'll do that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Warwick. I'll go ahead and hit the end record button.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. We'd love for you to join our free Substack community for The Herd is Calling. Connect with us, engage in thoughtful discussions, and access exclusive content. Click the link nearby to subscribe. It's so easy and totally free. We appreciate you listening, and as always, may the horse be with you.